Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mr OAU. It's lovely to see you all here again. Well, not see, but you know what I mean. Yeah, so just like how I say in every single video, I'm just going to aim for one take. It's purely because I'm too lazy to edit the videos myself and I'm too poor to hire an editor. So I do appreciate you sticking by me and putting up with my stumbling or my stuttering. Yeah, so I appreciate that. But hopefully the material that I go through will make up for it. Yeah, so just like the first video in the series. So this is part 2 in my series of videos discussing about visual texts. So this is going to be video 2. And just like what I did in video 1, I will introduce to you or a new visual technique that you could potentially use in future responses when you are analyzing a visual text. Yeah, so but before we jump into that, before I show you the visual technique that we will be exploring today in depth, I just wanted to show you this painting. Yeah, so what I'm planning on doing is at the beginning of each lesson, I do want to share something personal, a painting which I personally enjoy, and hopefully that will inspire you to become more enthusiastic about analyzing visual texts. Yeah. So yeah, for example, this painting, at least for me, I really enjoy paintings that captures a certain emotion or captures a certain feeling or thought. Yeah. In this case, the feeling that I get from this painting is, or the emotion that I think this painting captures really well is being courageous and being brave and kind of standing against all odds. Yeah, so yeah, leave a comment below if you know what this painting is, if you know the name and who painted it. Please leave a comment below. And no, you won't be getting any rewards or prizes because I'm too poor. Anyways, so yes, today the visual technique that we will be looking at is color. Yeah, so I've chosen this to be the second visual technique that we visit, and that's because color is probably something that you can always talk about when you're analyzing visual texts. Yeah, so you need to know how to talk about color. Yeah, so yeah, keep that in mind. Color is probably the most common visual technique used in a visual text. Even if there is no color in the visual text, you can say something about that. Yeah, you could say something about the lack of color and what the effect of that could be. Yeah, anyways, moving on. And this is how I have structured the lesson. Yeah, so I'm going to go through the definition of color with you, which should be pretty self-explanatory, to be honest. Looking through some examples, and I'm going to give you some useful tips that you can use. And then we're going to use everything that we've learned in a response, yeah, in part 4 of our lesson. Okay, so yeah, please pause the video if you need to. Or actually, no, I highly recommend you to pause the video now, read the information on the slide, and then unpause the video. I'm not going to pause and wait for you because it's going to be strange if there's a long period of silence in this video. So I'm going to continue on, but I'm going to trust you to pause this video and read the info first. Okay, so color refers to how colors are used within a visual image. Yeah, so that's pretty self-explanatory. This is when things get a bit more juicy, a bit more important. So colors carry symbolic meanings. Yeah, so you might be thinking to yourself, what does this mean? In this case, in other words, when you see a color, you don't just see the color. Yeah, that might sound weird, but hear me out. When you see a color, you also experience the emotions and ideas that are usually related to that color, right? So the example that I give is when you see the color red, right? You don't just see red, right? You see love or anger or danger, right? And the reason why you experience these feelings or you experience these thoughts is because it's been culturally embedded within us. Yeah, it's something that we all share. Yeah, I mean, in terms of some cultures, they might interpret certain colors differently, but we're not going to touch upon that today. Yeah, just keep in mind that when we do see, when we do see a color, we don't just see the color; we also see everything that is associated with that color. Okay, so Yeah, and the reason why an artist would use color in their visual images is in order to evoke certain emotions or conjure up certain ideas through the use of that color. Yeah, so for example, they might use a lot of red in their poster in order to signify that a couple is deeply in love with each other. Yeah, so yeah, and things to keep in mind, yeah, when you're looking at color. So what emotions does the color evoke? What ideas does the color conjure up? Is there color contrast, which is another thing that you can focus on? Yeah. So if you are not too sure, if you aren't too sure, does that make sense? Yeah, I think that makes sense. If you're not too sure what emotions or what ideas are associated with certain colors, you can easily go online, and there are plenty of websites that will have tables explaining the symbolic meanings of each color. Yeah, so I'll leave that up to you if you need the extra help. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples now. Okay, so we have a very interesting drawing by Sean Tan. He is quite a famous Australian. What does he do? He draws picture books. Yeah, I don't know if that's if there's a proper name. A cartoonist, I believe. Oh, not really a cartoonist. Probably an artist. Yeah, that's probably more fair. But anyways, so if we have a look at this image, we can see that the main character's surroundings plus his outfit are all covered in this very grey and dull color, right? Very dull and grey. And you can see that the setting, he's in a cubicle, in an office cubicle, so he's at work right now. Yeah. So if you think about it, what does this create, right? It doesn't just mean that he's got a bad fashion sense and that's why he's wearing all grey. It's not because of that, or it's not because the interior design decorator has a really bad taste in design, and that's why they've painted everything in grey. It's not because of that. It's because we associate certain feelings and emotions with the color grey. Grey is kind of boring and dull and lacking in energy. And because of this, you can apply it to the office setting, right? If you can imagine people just slaving away in an office cubicle 8 hours a day for 50-40 years, imagine how boring that would be, right? And that boringness and that kind of lethargy is drawn out by the grey color, or highlighted. It's accentuated by the grey color. Okay, let's have a look at this. So this is the second example, and what we get is it's quite the opposite, right? We'll get a town that's decorated with rainbow-colored pastel hues, right? So it's, first of all, it's rainbow-colored, so it's not dull or boring. It's quite energetic, and it's quite positive. The feeling that you get is a lot more positive than the other image. So you can talk about how perhaps this town is quite cheerful, it's quite welcoming, because of the rainbow colors. Maybe it's very accepting of diversity, right? And I think the pastel hues, the kind of muted colors, also gives off a sense of calmness. So if the colors are too saturated, if they're too bright, then it's almost too energetic. It's too much, too confronting. But because the colors are muted, it also gives off this very calm and relaxing feeling to the town as well. So maybe it's a holiday town. Who knows? But you can see how in the two images, in the two examples that I've shown you, the use of colors completely changes the mood and completely changes our interpretation. So hopefully by now you can see how we associate different feelings and different ideas with different colors. If you only take away one thing from this lesson, remember that. Each color will give off a different feeling or conjure up a different idea. So remember that. Okay, so some useful tips. Because there's a lot of stuff, or there's a lot of information on this slide, I do suggest you to pause it again. I'm going to continue on because I trust that you have read it by now and you've unpaused the video. So because we associate so many emotions and so many ideas with certain colors, things can get quite confusing, especially when especially when we associate contradictory emotions or contradictory thoughts with the same color. So you get this with colors such as red, right? So red can either mean love and romance, or it can represent aggression and bloodshed and death, right? So those two sets of ideas and emotions highly contrast against each other. Yeah, so what can we do to determine which set of emotion or which set of ideas is the artist trying to convey through their use of red? Yes, what can we do? So number one, you really want to have a look at the elements of the visual image, right? Use the elements in the visual image to determine the context that the color is used in. Yeah, and obviously use a little bit of common sense. That's number B. Yeah, so essentially what that means is if you are looking at a visual image about Valentine's Day, right, then the use of red is most likely going to be symbolic of love and romance and all things good. Yeah, it's not going to symbolize bloodshed or death. Yeah, so by looking at the poster, by recognizing that it is about Valentine's Day, you can use that context to determine what the red is meant to mean. Yeah, what emotion or what feelings and thoughts are we meant to associate with the red color? Yeah, so that should be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so useful tip number 2. You can also, so like in the second example, I talked about how the colors are quite muted. They're not as vibrant or not as bright. Yeah, so you can get different variations of the same color as well. Yeah, and different variations of the same color can also produce different meanings. Yeah, so for example, a vibrant red, a bright red, it's very fierce. Yeah, a fierce red can show passion, like a passionate love, a love that's very, very strong and ready to explode. Yeah, and usually you might associate that kind of love with a couple who has just gotten married. Yeah, and then whereas if there is a muted red color, a kind of light red color, it can symbolize a less intense but more stable kind of love. Yeah, so it's still linked back to love, but because it's less bright, it's a less passionate kind of love. Yeah, and this love obviously does exist as well. Yeah, and this is me stereotyping here, but usually this muted red with this less intense but more stable kind of love, it's more commonly found among elderly couples who have been married to each other for many years. Yeah, but that's not too important. Just take my word for it. Okay. Alright, so now let's put everything that we've learned to use. So I apologize if I'm going a bit too fast. I do naturally tend to talk quite quickly. You could slow the video down, or you could watch it again, which will help me increase my views. Yeah, so it's a win-win for me, I guess. Anyways, yes, let's use it in a response. So text X is a visual text or visual image. It's called The Drover's Wife by Russell Drysdale. The question at the bottom, what does text X suggest about the Australian outback? Yeah, so have a think. Pause the video now and see if you give it a go yourself. Obviously, when you first look at the poster, there is a lack of color, right? If anything, it's kind of like a monochromatic brown. Yeah, everything's kind of brown and dull. Yeah, focus on that. If you're not too sure, use that as my tip. Focus on the brown. Okay. So I'm going to assume that you have planned your response, or even better, if you've written a response yourself, feel free to type your responses in the comments, and I will leave you comments and I will give you marks. Yeah, well, I'll mark your responses for you. Okay, so I'm going to go through the answer with you now. So this is a short answer because, yeah, sometimes it's just better to get straight to the point. You don't have to put big words into your responses and make your sentences extremely long in order to get the marks. Yeah, sometimes being clear and being straight to the point will get you the most marks. Okay, so in this case, I start off with the point. As always, text X suggests that life in the Australian outback is unexciting. Right? True. That's my idea. So now let's prove that this idea has been represented by the image. So the image is predominantly colored with muted or monochromatic brown hues. Yep. So the dull color scheme puts emphasis on how living in Australian outback is also largely dull, slow, and uneventful. Yeah. So you can see how the artist has used a lot of brown in the image, right? He has used a lot of brown in the image because he knows that this kind of brown color will trigger a certain emotion within us. Yeah, and when we see brown, we usually think, oh, it's very boring, very dull, very slow, like not very energetic. Yeah, and because we get these emotions, we can also apply these emotions to the outback. All right, and we can come to the conclusion that Drysdale, by using a monochromatic color scheme to decorate his painting, he's meant to highlight how living in the outback is also, similarly like the color brown, quite boring, energetic or unenergetic, and kind of lifeless. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So, anyways, that concludes part 2 in our series of videos on visual texts. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two. Please make sure to subscribe and like the video so that I will be more motivated to make future videos. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.